Right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the grand finale panel of
Can we
this
give it
book.
just 1 second, Sandy? It looks like
Oh,
people are
yep.
still coming in from the waiting room, so
Oh, sounds good.
we'll get officially started in just a second. I don't want anybody to miss anything. It's like listening for the pops on microwave popcorn to make sure everybody's in. Okay, welcome everybody. This is Billy from Bookstore Romance Day. Thank you for being here for our final panel of Bookstore Romance Day weekend 2024. Thank you to the authors, all of them who have been here over the weekend, all of the moderators, and especially thank you to our current slate of authors and to Sandie for moderating this grand finale. Sandie, it's all yours.
Thank you so much. And, welcome to this final panel of this Bookstore Romance Day weekend. We have not two, not three, not four, not five, but six amazing authors for you to listen to today. And I'm going to let each of them give their own intro and talk about the books that they are promoting on this panel about Romantasy. So welcome first to, I'm just going to say your names as you pop up on my screen, to Lexi Ryan.
Hello, I'm Lexi Ryan. I'm the author of YA fantasy, of course, and also contemporary romance. My latest release is Beneath These Cursed Stars. Isn't she pretty? It's a story about a princess armed with Death's Kiss who teams up with a Fae shifter to try to assassinate a wicked king and avoid a fatal prophecy.
Excellent. And next, Megan Scott.
Hi, my name's Megan Scott, and I live in the north of England. I love mythology, art history, thrifting, beaches, and spending time with my family. My book is The Temptation of Magic. It's actually not out yet in the US. It's coming out in 9 days on the 27th. So it is an upper YA contemporary fantasy, and it features an art history student who studies mythological paintings whilst hiding her true abilities from the organization that rules all supernaturals. But when the organization sends their best assassin to her university town, she risks being discovered and falling for him, because if he figures out what she is, he's going to have to hunt her next.
We see the themes of the hunters and the hunted. So next, Krtisten Ciccarelli.
Hi, I'm Kristen. I'm the author of Heartless Hunter and Rebel Witch. This one comes out in February. And Heartless Hunter is set in a world where witches used to rule, they were overthrown, and now they're hunted down and purged. And it follows Rune Winters, who is a witch hiding in plain sight, who rescues other witches from the purge, and Gideon Sharp, the witch hunter, who is onto her.
I love them. Very excited. And next, Rachel Greenlaw.
Hi everyone, I'm Rachel Greenlaw. I am the author of Compass and Blade, the first in a YA romantasy trilogy. I live on a group of islands south of the UK, deep in the Atlantic Ocean, and this book was inspired by where I live. It tells the tale of Mira, a girl who grew up on the island of Rosevere, and she goes on an epic journey to discover something very deep in the heart of the ocean to save her father with. And on the way, there are betrayals and romance and sea monsters. And in the next book, I can confirm there will be witches.
Excellent. It's so soapy. I could not stop reading it. I read it in one sitting. And next, Angela Montoya.
Hello, I am Angela Montoya, and I am the author of young adult romantasy Sinner's Isle. Sinner's Isle follows Rosalinda, who is a majestic, which means she has magic. And because of that, she and other majestics have been banished to a tiny island in the center of the sea, Sinner's Isle. And the only way for them to get off of that island is to bind their magic to a man of influence, which we all hate. Obviously, Rosa hates. And so she blackmails this broody pirate that just so happens to wash up on shore. That's Sinner's Isle. And my next book that comes out is coming out in December. It's called A Cruel Thirst. And that one's just a fun, campy, swoony, vampy book that follows Lalo, who finds himself turned into a vampire. He hates it. He's terrible at it. It's the worst possible thing to happen to a germaphobe. And so he wants to turn himself back. So he goes to a pueblo thinking he could reverse the curse. And instead he finds a sassy vampire huntress named Carolina. Yeah, so that's that.
He's the most like bookish and adorable vampire ever. I can't wait for all of you to get to read that book.
Yeah.
And last but certainly not least, Kendare Blake.
Yeah, honestly, I always thought that becoming a vampire would be far more awkward and strange than anybody seems to think it is. Like, I can't imagine like the first time putting my mouth on a stranger's neck. Like, no, thank you. No, thank you. Hi, I can't wait to read that. That sounds really funny. I'm Kendare Blake, coming to you from surprisingly sunny day in the Pacific Northwest, so please excuse the glare on my glasses. I'm the author of Anna Dressed in Blood and Three Dark Crowns. My most recent like romantasy, since that is why we're here, is called Champion of Fate. It's set in the same universe as Three Dark Crowns, so there is a Fenburn queen in it, but the main character is an orphan girl named Reed who wants to join an immortal order of warrior women.
Okay, and that one I also read so quickly that I immediately had to look to see if the ARC was available of the next book, which it is. So I'll be reading that right when we get off of this panel, I think. So my first question, because the term has not always existed, is how do you even define romantasy? And does it differ from fantasy that happens to include a romantic subplot?
I think it probably does for me, at least. I think because it's got that great combination of the two words as well, you really want to have like the best of both worlds. And with romance, you have to have that happy ever after, and you really don't want the romance to get lost. I think it makes sense that it can, the story couldn't kind of still stand if the romance was taken out of it. That's kind of the way I think about romantasy, but I also do tend to think of it as high fantasy, which is sometimes why with my own book I'm a bit stuck, because mine's more contemporary fantasy or like a paranormal romance. But I'd be curious if everyone thinks, yes, it has to be high fantasy, or it can be any fantasy just with romance.
That's interesting. I think maybe some have a connotation of high fantasy, but in my mind, romantasy can absolutely be contemporary fantasy as well. It's interesting that we have terminology always changes in the business, and we've definitely taken fantasy. That's the label we want. And so we don't want to do urban fantasy anymore because that was like 2010. So now it's contemporary fantasy. So I understand the hesitation, but I think absolutely it can be high fantasy or contemporary fantasy. And I love the way you said that, you couldn't take the romance out and have the story still stand. I really think you nailed it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I completely agree. Like that, to me, that's what it is. It's just like you can't have one without the other. Like they both blend and complete the story that you're for your characters and for the plot, for everything, like the romance plus whatever this other thing is happening, be it like fantasy world or magic, whatever it is. For Sinner's Isle in particular, the magic was the fantasy element, and it based out of a world I created. With A Cruel Thirst, which is the vampy book, it's a little less of the world is magic and just that I created a new world where gods, exist and mess with things. And so, yeah, I feel like as long as they're both sort of in sync and blended, that's romantasy. And as long as we have that happy ending, we're good. Fingers crossed. Yeah.
I'm so glad you touched on that, because I do think that is the one thing that gets tricky for some folks who are coming from big R romance, even if they're younger readers, is that they're worried because so many fantasies, I mean, those of us who read paranormal books or dystopian books remember what happened with, a very well-known trilogy. So, I think that having that HEA be essential when you are calling the book Romantasy is good for people to know, because I think there's always this moment of like, well, what does that mean really? So my next question, just because I love to ask this, someone, oh, what, Kendare? Yes, you have something to say.
I'm gonna have to beg out of that because I feel like having the fantasy element in a romantasy kind of lets me wiggle away from the HEA necessarily, because when you have like high fantasy elements, you're usually dealing with like so many people dying and so much like high stakes that like, yes, we may have a moment of peace right now, but my whole family's dead and I only have one arm. So it's kind of like I can get away with a little more bittersweet than I feel like I could if it was if the romance was not balanced with, all the dragons eating people.
Yes, I totally understand what you're saying, and I agree that because of the fantasy element, there may be deaths, there may be sadness, there may be tragedy involved in the high stakes nature. And I have read your book, so I know that for sure. So my next question, which should be pretty easy to answer, is what are some of your, or who are some of your literary OTPs, one true pairings, and have you included anything from those relationships in the love stories that you've written?
I'll go first. So I would say my top two would be Ross and Demelza from Poldark, and Eugenides and Queen Irene from the Queen's Thief series. Those are probably my two top. And I think the thing I love about Ross and Demelza is that they have this like super flawed, like not at all, like it's not at all it's like feisty and fiery and very complicated, but they're like so obviously soulmates and they're so obviously meant to be together, even when things don't look like they're meant to be together. Which maybe possibly I put like the inspiration of that into Heartless Hunter. And then I just think Eugenides and Irene is like the ultimate enemies to lovers, for me anyway.
As I
I
considered
don't-
this, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. No, you go first.
I was just going to say, as I considered this question, it was funny to me that, first of all, that most of the couples I came up with were vampires. They're from a vampire canon, I'm like Eric and Suki and Elena and Damon and Jacob and Bella. I'm sorry. I'm not even sorry. I'll go, against canon for that one. But I think it kind of points to my absolute adoration of the love triangle. And like those characters and those couples wouldn't stick with me if it weren't for the angst of the love triangle that was part of their story.
I'm going to talk about a couple that, like in a book that actually hasn't come out yet. So I'm just going to plug it now. So it's by Laura Stephen, and the couple that I'm thinking of are in Our Infinite Fates. I don't know if anyone's heard of it. It's coming out in 2025, and Evelyn and Arden in that book are just like one of the best like romantasy couples I think I've ever read. Obviously, like my own work isn't like at all influenced by them because it hasn't come out yet, but I like if anyone gets a chance to read that, like I just think that they are the best pairing I've read in a fantasy book pretty much ever. They're brilliant.
Wow. I'm taking notes. I'm gonna look for the arcs soon because that sounds amazing. I mean, for me, obviously, like OG Pride and Prejudice, you just can't beat the hand flex moment. It just gets me every time. But like Cassandra Clare's The Infernal Devices. Oh my gosh, it's not a couple necessarily. It's not a throuple, but it's kind of hard to explain if you haven't read it. But Tessa falls in love separately with these two best friends, and it's like this heartbreaking, beautiful series. And I like still to this day, it's been years since I read it, but I still just remember bawling my eyes out at the end. But it was the most beautiful, perfect meant to be ending. I strive to be Cassandra Clare. I just, yeah, someday I just want to be her is what I'm going for. But yeah, haven't done it yet, but I definitely love like a good angsty heartbreak love.
Yeah, with
Anyone?
Cassandra Clare, like even when she's writing characters and you think they might be siblings, you're like, I don't care, just kiss. It doesn't even matter.
Yeah.
You're doing this so well. I just want them to make out. We'll ignore it. Just don't have children. It'll be fine. There are ways around it.
It's true.
So
It's
yeah,
true.
yeah. I totally second like any of her pairings. She just does that chemistry so well. I'm gonna go like way back and like Jane and Rochester from why am I blanking on the Jane Eyre, which I realized that hasn't aged very well, but when I read it as a teenager, I didn't understand all of the connotations behind his wife and her madness. I had not read Wide Sargasso Sea yet, so when I was reading it as a kid, I was just like, wow, look at you awkward weirdos finding each other. Let's just get that worked out. So to this day, I have a thing for awkward weirdos who find like commonality in each other.
Excellent. Does anybody else have an OTP they want to share? If not, I think we can move on to our next question, which is about world building. Tell us about the universes in which your books are set. What kind of research was involved in writing that world? And are the settings analogs for any real world places?
Mine, in The Temptation of Magic, because it's a contemporary fantasy, I wanted to set it in England, but I also wanted it to be like my kind of ideal town. So I made a fictional town, but I put it in like in between two real places. So Cornwall and Devon and around that area on the south coast. But because one of the characters, because in the book, the creatures that I developed are called Imperials. So they can basically they hunt any deadly creature that's going to kill someone because it releases like a kill scent, and it triggers them to transform into that creature's natural predator and kill them to save people. So one of the things about Imperials is that they become immortal when they have their first transformation. So one of the main characters is immortal and is from 2000 years ago, like in the Iron Age in Ireland. And that's where my family is from. So I did a lot, maybe too much research concerning that period, and I had to really hold back jumping it into book one and stringing it out into the series. And if I was ever allowed to do a prequel, I would want to do that, where I could really go historical and show everything. But that was one of the things that came in for my world building, and also because of the art history in the book, and I studied art history as a research degree as well. There was a lot of time spent looking at mythological paintings, kind of imagining what in them might be real, what in them might not, what they could mean for the character in the world. So it was really fun to go through a lot of paintings and choose which would be most relevant for the world. And trying to focus also on some female artists as well that might not have been so well known. So for me, the research was really, really fun, but also a lot. And I found that especially with book two, I did it because it's also taken me, it took me like 16 years or something ridiculous to get an agent. So over that time, like I wrote and researched a lot. So getting to book two, as I've started now, I really had to take like several weeks or months, like going through all the research and trying to pick out what works best for the world, for the new world building. So that's probably those are probably the main aspects of my world building research that I did.
Yeah, I did a ton of research for world building. I think because originally I thought I wanted to do a historical romance. And as I did a bunch of research, I realized like, oh, that's above my pay grade. It's to do it right. And so, but I knew for Sinner's Isle, obviously I was going to have pirates in it. And so I did a ton of research on pirate history, which is rather fascinating, and it's a world history actually, because piracy did so much, with trade and all sorts of things. So it's really fascinating. And then, yeah, I knew I wanted to be like Pirates of the Caribbean inspired, that sort of feel. So I watched, I mean, this isn't necessarily research, but I watched all the movies and, Black Sails. And I thought, oh, that's pretty historically correct. Not necessarily, but pirates are very, very fascinating. And so I did a bunch of research, and also on Mexican history, and because again, I thought I was going to do a historical romance. But I used all of the stuff that I learned while I was deep diving and just spiraling into this pirate history lore. And I took all of this information and I would just add little bits into Sinner's Isle that maybe no one would necessarily even care or notice about, but I was like, yes, like real pirates are when they're gonna read this book and they're gonna know, like, yes, she got it. So I would add these little bits in for me, and it felt like they were more grounded. And then for A Cruel Thirst, I watched The Mask of Zorro, and I thought, yes, we need more of this in our lives. The world needs more. Zorro inspired everything. And so I'm from California. I am Mexican American. It's just in the blood to research, again, Mexican history, but also California history, which is also Mexican history. And so I did, again, a deep dive into California, which was at that point part of the Mexican Empire. And so again, I was just learning all of these things about vaqueros and, again, cowboys and, all of the fun stuff. And again, I would just add these little things that only I would know or a vaquero would understand. And so, yeah, I love research, especially I think for fantasy, we could add it into all these different fun little things.
Fun tip for both of those authors, there's a ton of things that you as a reader can then go Google, whether it's the paintings or literally the outfits that the vaqueros are wearing. It's a lot of fun. So they both did a very good job. Does anybody else want to talk about their world building? Rachel, I'm really fascinated with yours. I might have to call you out because I, read the book this week.
Okay, so Cumston Blade is basically the love letter to where I live. So where I live, it's an archipelago of 5 inhabited islands, and probably 200 islands and islets that are uninhabited, and we're surrounded by about 1,000, maybe more, shipwrecks from across many hundreds of years. The last one that wrecked on our shores was, I think, 1997, the wreck of the Cita, and my husband and his brothers grew up in trainers that wrecked from that ship. We've got doors in our house from that wreck. You just claim salvage, and then you can gather up the stuff from the wreck. So that was completely inspired by the real world, like the events of Cumston Blade, and also just the sensory details, like when Mary goes sea swimming, I sea swim all the time. The storms when they pass over in the winter, they're pretty epic and dramatic. I did obviously take the real world setting and then think how can I make it more dramatic and less, more fantasy based. So obviously we've got sea monsters, we've got magic, we've got this very deadly group of people called the Watch, who are kind of the enemy. So I just made it so much more exciting than how it maybe would have been in about 1800, when people would have been living on these islands and scratching out a living. But it is very much inspired by a real place, and you can Google it. It's the Isles of Scilly, and you can read all about the amazing history and be as much of a nerd as I am about the place.
It kind of sounds like you and Angela should write a book together about pirates and your island. So my next question, because it's romance of all, and it doesn't matter what kind of romance, we should talk about tropes. And I say this as a veteran bookseller who deals with a lot of veteran romance readers who are looking for very specific tropes. And you have to know, as a bookseller, when you're hand selling the book, what tropes are in the book, because some readers love some and dislike others. So I'm asking you, which tropes are in your books, and what is your favorite trope to write? And is that different than your favorite tropes to read?
I love tropes, and I tend to be suspect of anyone who says they don't. I'm like, you're lying to yourself. You're lying to yourself. You love them. You've just convinced yourself you're not using them. And I apologize if I've stepped on anyone's feet. They were like, I was about to say how much I hate them. No, I love tropes, and I think that when you're really aware of them, it just shows how well you know the genre, how much you read, how much you respect what the people before you have done. I have a very specific trope that is my very favorite to write. And you can laugh because it's kind of funny that my very favorite trope to write is an amnesia love triangle. It can't even just be a love triangle. I want an amnesia love triangle. And I have just found as many creative ways as possible to make different variations. Because how many of those do you get to write in your career? I'm working on my third. So, but it's not amnesia, but it is amnesia. But I actually don't love reading amnesia. I most of the time it's not a win for me. So for whatever reason, probably because it is my favorite to write, there's a very specific feel that I want in there that I'm going for when I write it. And if the person who's writing what I'm reading isn't after that same emotion, I'm just less interested. I love a good enemies to lovers, but specifically in fantasy where the enemy part comes from something big, something dramatic, something high stakes. I don't want a lower stakes enemies to lovers usually, though there are plenty of people who can do it very, very well. So yeah, I do think it's interesting that sometimes the ones we love to write aren't as much the ones we love to read.
I think I also love tropes, and I've been really interested because I wasn't on Book Talk since like its inception, so I'm pretty new to Book Talk myself. But I love hearing people just talk about books, about what tropes they like, what tropes they don't like, and how intense people can be about their tropes in terms of like if it doesn't hit the trope properly, people will get angry. Like kind of like you say, it's like no, but the enemies of love to lovers has to have like a knife to the throat, or it has to be I will kill you. So I think it's really interesting to see like what exactly makes the trope work for people as well, because it's one thing that I found a lot of people have asked me for the Temptation of Magic, is it enemies to lovers? And it's not really. Like it's kind of one-sided enemies to lovers. Because she's trying to hide what she is, and he's the same as her, but he's working for the organization that killed her mother, would take her in. She has to hide it. So she hates him. The second they meet, she does not trust him. He is her enemy, but he has absolutely no idea what she's talking about or why, because she can't let on why she feels that way. So I had to, I realized I was like, it's not really enemies to lovers, but it is definitely forced proximity. And I think that's one of my favorite tropes. My other favorites that aren't in the book, but only one bed. I love the only one bed. If you get on the floor, you've ruined it. I'm sorry. You have to get in the bed. You can't sleep in the bathtub. And then a good old marriage of convenience as well. But yeah, I think it's really interesting to see what will qualify a trope, and if you're disqualified from the trope because you haven't done it a certain way. I think it's very interesting.
I am like a trope newbie. Like I am unaware of many of the tropes that exist. I was just on, it's so funny that you say like all of those tropes that you've listed off. I was just on a panel called like Battle of the Tropes, and was introduced to the concept of the trope just one horse instead of just one bed, like just one horse. I'm like, that's a thing? Like these poor horses, stop doing things on them. It was, I don't know, like, do any of you guys have like really
They're
weird
not doing
tropes that you've
anything, I
come across?
promise. It's only sexual tension.
Okay, so
They're not
people
doing
are
anything.
like, it's on the horse. It's happening.
It's
sexual
not just
tension.
sexual tension in The Witcher. If anyone knows about the unicorn in The Witcher, anyone in the comments, you will know what I'm talking about. But anyway, moving on.
It can pretty much be just one anything, right? Just one canoe, just one tent, just one sleeping bag is pretty popular in contemporary romance. But I think you need to read maybe more historical romance. There's a lot of just one horse in that. Um, so Rachel, Kristen, any favorite tropes, and do they differ when you're writing them than when you're reading them?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I have like a difference. Like I love enemies to lovers. I love Only One Bed. I love fake dating. I love marriage with convenience. But I don't like any of those things. I would say though I have like very particular like micro tropes that I like. So she needs help getting out of her dress. That is like like I will eat that up every time. And then like kissing to like distract the bad guys or to like somehow get away from the bad guys, like have them like overlook you or like something like that. I really love those two for some reason. Yeah, both of those are in Rebel Witch actually. Yeah.
The things I will do for this book, honestly, I cannot wait to read Rebel Rich. Like, you have no idea.
I'll have them send you one.
Thank you. I think yours does enemies to lovers so well. Like, because I haven't read anything new in so long because I've been on deadline. But like, yeah, I read Crimson Moth and or Heartless Hunter, where depending on where you are, and the enemies to lovers and that, guys, everyone, yeah, so great.
Thank you.
I actually read Rebel Witch first because I messed up.
I'm so sorry.
And no, it's fine. I'm still getting such a kick out of going back and seeing how it all started. But I'm also loving the taking your measurements for a dress I'm making for you microtrope. And I had never known that was a thing. But I'm going to say the rest of you should add that. Make the guy a tailor or, who can make a dress for you. So one thing I picked up on, obviously, probably everyone who's listening did too, is that there's a lot of forbidden love in your books. And, especially that between hunters or slayers and the paranormal beings that they've been trained to kill. So what drew you to that especially angst-filled dynamic? And I'm wearing a Six of Crows shirt, which you cannot see, but I'm there for it. But please tell the rest of us what drew you to that.
I know for me in particular, with Sinner's Isle, it was enemies to lovers in my mind. It was like a soft enemies to lovers where they both have like preconceived notions of what the other one is, and that therefore they hate each other just naturally. She doesn't like men. He's a man, and he doesn't like witches. She's a witch. So, there's that. But when I started working on book 2, which is A Cruel Thirst, I wanted to like explore, no, we really, really do not like each other. And what better than a wannabe vampire huntress and a vampire? You can't get any more fun than that. And so I just really wanted to like explore that hatred. And, but then also it makes it so much more fun, like angsty wise, when she knows this creature is everything she has been taught in her entire life to hate. And yet he's really sweet. He's actually just a boy. And, and so she starts falling for him. So yeah, it became for me just a pure delight to write these sort of characters and really just explore again, like the angst, which I adore in any book. Like any book that makes my heart squeeze is what it's like catnip. I can't get enough of it. And so that like star-crossed love like that, yeah, it was just a joy to write. And it's funny, like listening to you guys all list off all of these tropes, I just got so giddy because every single one I was like, yes, 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 I want them all, I'll take them all. And so adding that enemies to lovers trope was me trying to go deeper than what I did with Sinner's Isle, and A Cruel Thirst was hopefully what I did this time.
I love the idea, like you said, of like, why am I feeling this way for this person? And it heightens all like the confusion. And I think it does work so well in YA as well, because things are happening to you to a degree for the first time, like these like big emotions that you're really going to struggle with. Because I remember another reason why I wanted to make Nicole what she was to have her feel that way. But I also, because when I started reading, like one of my first books was Twilight. I was that age. It was just it was the OG one. And Hush Hush and Vampire Diaries, like the show. I was obsessed with the show Vampire Diaries. But I remember I really wanted, for this hunter dynamic, I wanted the girl to be the one that had the dark, like the difficulty controlling herself, like the bloodthirstiness, like to be the dangerous one. Not so much like the male character, but then I knew that if she was going to be this, I really wanted them to, despite there being this like hunter and hunted possible energy, to be actually on even footing. Like they are the same type of being, they're just not aware of it. So one obviously is a bit more experienced and has been with their power longer, like understands their power a bit more. But I really loved the idea of actually they may be like, pitted against one another, but they're a lot more similar than they realize, and they share a lot of, they're both actually striving for the same thing, but they just don't realize it.
I think I just find it really enjoyable to watch my characters fall in love, knowing that I'm gonna rip them apart. That's just fun for me. I'm like a cooler at a casino. Like, have your fun now, kids, because it's not happening. Like, you're not gonna stay that way. And that's I don't know. Maybe I'm terrible. I'm just a terrible person. But I also like that in my fiction too. I love it when a couple that like has to overcome like some insurmountable thing, and the minute there's yearning because they can't be together, I'm there all day.
I have a theory that like, okay, so the enemies to lovers trope ever like is kind of a big one. Most people like that trope. And then like the like hunter versus hunted or like forbidden romance is like of like an incarnation of that trope. And I think the reason, oh sorry, that was my husband. I think the reason I wonder if the reason is because like that trope is like the ultimate claim that love conquers all. Because it's like we're reading romance. We know that this couple's going to get together at the end. So it's like we want to see how it happens because we want love to conquer all. And that's my theory. I don't know if it's correct, but
I love that, and I agree.
I also do want to say that, yes, Kendare, you do put your lovers through the ringer and sometimes cruelly give them best friends who are able to hop in and out of beds pretty easily while they are taking a very slow route to their love stories. But I won't harp on that, but it is true. So speaking of YA, I feel like the line has sort of blurred where I'm getting a lot of young, like even ninth graders coming into the high school library asking for romantasies that are really not aimed at teens, but then books by, epic reads, they're still sort of supposed to be aimed at teens, but we know that statistically, a lot of consumers of YA are adults. So how do you balance keeping your love stories sex positive and swoony and steamy without necessarily erasing that line that would make it more okay, you can get that you saw on Book Talk somewhere else, but not from the imprint and not from the school library and that kind of thing.
Can I just ask how old ninth graders are? We don't grade kids like that in the
right.
UK.
So
Sorry.
they would be like 14, right? So like
Okay.
13, 14 when they start ninth grade.
Yeah, I think for me at least, I know that I think it's always good to have a variation in YA. I think that's the most important thing because it's a category that spans from technically from 13 to 18-year-olds as readers, you just will never, someone who a 13-year-old is not going to be interested in the same things an 18-year-old is necessarily, like just in terms of life, not just in terms of like romance, what they feel ready for and things like that. So I think that it's, first of all, like important to have a variation, and also because like I say, as people, we're also so different. So some of us would feel ready for something at a certain age that others aren't. So I also don't think that it should be ever like, a case of there shouldn't be any, because it's also such an important part of life. And, growing up and first times, YA is about like becoming a young adult. And I think that's also the weird thing about the term young adult. Outside of literature, young adult doesn't mean, it means a different thing as well. We've got teenagers and then we've got young adults, but that's not the way it's phrased in literature, which is kind of strange. For me, I think it tends to be where the line is if something is like more of a first time experience, if it's something that fits more with like the world the character is in. I think I've noticed, and I'd be interested to hear what people think about this, but in adult romances, I do think it's leaned for it in the last 20 years. I think we've moved away from kind of like virgin main characters in adult romance novels. The characters seem to be a bit more experienced, whereas 20 years ago, it tended to be girl was a virgin, guy was not, he was the experienced one, and that was like the thing, because there was nowhere else to write that or have that development. But now that I think that we, as women in general, but also society has like hopefully progressed a bit more in the terms of like, yeah, women have sex too, like romance is important, that it means that the first time element has gotten maybe a little bit lost in certain adult romance books. So for me, at least, I think for the line is probably more like what the characters are comfortable with, and allowing it to be steamy as well without like worrying that, I think readers are aware of how much they can cope with, and if it's not for them, they can pop it down as well. But yeah, I think there is definitely, I think the main difference is just the language that you use, to describe certain things.
Megan, I think you hit so many things so beautifully. I do think we need the variety. I think it's so important that there is not just romance, not just sexual tension, not just chemistry, but like actual sex available in young adult books. And I know some people cringe to hear me say that, but we need to keep in mind that we are offering readers an opportunity to see a very positive sexual relationship where consent matters, where women's pleasure matters. And maybe we don't go into that in the same detail in the YA that we would in the adult romance, but it still matters because a lot of these kids are sexually active to some degree. Even if they're not, they probably will be someday. And what they're taught is healthy and normal, they will internalize. So I think it's incredibly important. Also, there are a sad number of children who have sexual experience that they did not consent to, who are coming to books, who deserve an opportunity to see a relationship like that and the physical interaction like that, that can be healthy, that can be positive for them, and that is safe because it's on the page. And they need to explore that safe space of sexuality on the page before they'll ever be ready to try it for themselves in a healthy, consensual way, the way it always should have been, right? So I do think kids will self-censor. So if they're not comfortable with reading something that has a sex scene, they're probably going to opt out. And usually you can kind of tell based on the chemistry on the page what's coming. I like to use my kids as an example. My son was reading Red Queen. And if you guys have read it, you know that like the love scene in it is very, very tame, and it's like four books in. But my son was a couple books in, and I said, hey, just want you to know, just heads up, there's a love scene coming in a couple books. Because I recommended this series, so I thought that you'd want to know. Not much described. You'll be okay. And he's like, nope. He just stopped reading the series. He's out. My daughter, she's fine. She doesn't care. So they really do. They really will self-censor based on what they need and want and are comfortable with. But yeah, I think it's not only necessary, it's kind of a privilege to be able to put something positive into the hands of younger readers.
And I just want to applaud all of you who did include love scenes. They were all really more emotions based, which I do think as a reader and as an educator is the difference that I have seen. And I read a lot of romance, but when it is YA, and I love that some of you have also explored what happens when the person you've chosen and you consented to being with betrays you and hurts you very deeply. I mean, I don't want to spoil anything about which one of you did that, but it was done in a wonderful way, in a way that makes you realize, yes, sometimes there, things can happen and that person can hurt you, but at that time, it doesn't take away from what you felt at that moment. So thanks to all of you for having sex positive books and characters. I'm still waiting, Kendare, but again, whatever. Okay, I want to talk about main character energy among your supporting characters, because I feel like this is something that we all need, especially when romantasy can get dark and serious. We need that comic relief. We need those characters that are just going to make us smile. I want each of you to just sort of quickly tell us about a supporting character who has this main character energy, who we're all going to love and enjoy hearing from in your books.
I'll go for Sinner's Isle. There is a character, his name is Santiago, and he is the one that I get the most DMs about all the time. It's never, I mean, maybe that's sad, but it's never necessarily about my main characters. It's always about Santi. And I get it. I love him. He's this rascal scoundrel pirate, and he's the sidekick to Mariano. And truly, it's one of my favorite things about the story, because for Mariano, the male main character, I really wanted to kind of dive into like machismo culture. So like in Hispanic culture, it's what it is to be a man. Like you got to be tough and all these things. And so Mariano's dealing with that, and Santi is there to just break every single thing Mariano has had in his mind down, and their bromance is so special. So yeah, he's the comical relief. He can't take anything seriously, but it's because he has such a traumatic past that he doesn't want to go there. And so he just cracks jokes and makes everything ridiculous. So yeah, he's my guy.
Well, in Champion of Fate, I definitely have a couple of those. The one I'll talk about, her name is Queen Ethiel. No, it's not Queen Ethiel anymore. It's just Ethiel. But she is a queen from Three Dark Crowns. So when I put her in the book initially, I just wanted it to be an Easter egg for Three Dark Crowns readers, so they could go like, oh, cool, like, and that was it. She was supposed to be in one paragraph. But the minute I put her in, she's like, no, I'm going to be in the whole book. And I'm like, no, you're not. And she's like, yes, I'll be back. You just wait. So she horned her way into the entire book. She ends up playing like a major role in the second book, as queens do. They just do whatever the heck they want, I guess. But I loved her because she became she's a war queen. So she loves bloodshed. If you're war gifted on Fenburn, you're like super into childbirth because of the pain. Like they're very bloodthirsty people. So every time she shows up in a scene, you just know something's going to get wrecked. And it's very fun to write.
I love that. Okay, I guess I'll say there's one character who I get DMs about, that is Harrow. She is a side character, and I think the reason people like her so much and like ask me for like spin-off or like a spin-off novella or short stories, is because she's like very mysterious. She has a very like dark, it's like hinted at that it's a very dark backstory. And she's also sort of like at odds. She's Gideon's friend, maybe, maybe not. And you don't know like where her loyalty really lies, and they're often at odds with each other. Like she's constantly like pushing him into doing the things that he like knows he should do but doesn't like, is conflicted about. So yeah, I think probably if I were to write like a novella or something, it would be about Harrow.
For me, I've had a fair few people message about a character called Callum. He is the main love interest, Kian's best friend, and he comes in at a certain point in the book, which is quite dangerous for Nicole. And so like everyone loves him, like everyone wants to know more about him. When they, they're like, in the next book I want more Callum. And otherwise Nicole's little sister Bells, I've seen a few people be like, if anything happens to Bells, like that's it. So she must be protected at all costs, because she is, bless her, she's really sweet. But yeah, Callum steals every single scene that he's in, because he's very charming, but he has a lot of secrets, and a lot of hidden power within him as well. So and especially in the second book and the third book, because I've been able to do more point of view scenes, scenes with him and Nicole's brother have been like book stealing. I've had to be like, stop writing these scenes because the rest of the book needs to be done. But I'm really excited for those.
He's super charming. So everyone watch out. Rachel, do you have one that you want to share?
The character that I get the most messages about, and I promise you're going to see a lot more of him, is Eli. Everybody asks me about Eli. Everybody loves Eli. And he's not who you think he's going to be. Like he's really not. And I think everyone's going to be surprised as they hear more about him in the rest of the trilogy. But there's definitely going to be a lot more page time for my terrible bad boy Eli. So yeah.
So we do have a few questions in the Q&A. If anybody else wants to add some, I'm just going to start asking. Melanie Keating wants to know, what's your favorite YA book to recommend to others besides your own?
This is so hard. I think sorry. I think everyone's on the panel, like, to be genuine, like honestly, just so good. Like that would be, in the last year, some of the best YA that I've read. Yeah.
I was just about to recommend Megan's book. So we're all going to recommend each other's books. I absolutely loved Megan's book because the atmosphere is just incredible. Like, I wanted to move to this Cornish town. Like, I would quite happily have gone to university there and drank lavender lattes, and it's so perfect. And like, I grew up in Cornwall, and like it just captures that like small Cornish town with the like shops with crystals in next to the like cool bookshops and like the coffee shops and the like sea mist and the gorgeous beaches. And it's just such a fantastic book, and I can't recommend it enough.
It's hard to choose like just one. I feel like every single YA book I read is my new favorite book. I'll just think of like the most recent ones I've read. The Dividing Sky, which comes out in October. It's a dystopian like sci-fi romance novel by Jill Tu. Top tier, 10 out of 10. I just finished I Wish You Would. So good. And then this is like it's like a mystery thriller horror. It's called Here Lies a Vengeful Bitch. And it is, you've never read a book like this. It's by Cody Crawley. Fabulous. Yeah.
Well, that reminds me, actually, there is one, Immortal Dark, by Tigger Skirma, that's coming out. It's a vampire book, all black cast with like a secret university. She's convinced that one of the vampires has like kidnapped her sister, and she like goes to basically take them all down, but is kind of like bound to this vampire, very enemies to lovers. You're gonna be pleased with those enemies to lovers. I've only just gotten arc, so I'm only a little bit way through, but like it's gonna be one of the new favorites, just hands down. Yeah.
I literally just got that book yesterday. It has beautiful like edges, like just gorgeous book. Somebody was saying something.
Oh yeah, me, sorry. This fall I'm recommending a couple. The 13th Child is coming from Aaron Craig, which I love everything that Aaron writes. The 13th Child is kind of a take on Godfather Death, and it's extremely gothic. There's ghosts, there's, you know, castles, there's a whole lot of birthday cakes, which I personally am very into, but definitely recommend the 13th Child. And also my friend Lish McBride has one coming out called Red in Tooth and Claw, and it's a weird like horror western frontier book. And she nails that frontier survival vibe. Like, it's a story of an orphan who goes to this settlement, and like things are not right at this settlement. But, you know, I mean, if you're in the mood for like creepy Little House on the Prairie, give it a try.
Somebody else asked, what's your favorite season vibe to write in? And what does your writing setup look like?
I genuinely defy anyone to say summer. I don't think anyone is going to say summer. Is anyone going to say it?
I don't think so.
No,
it doesn't offer
because
as much mood. It's not as moody
and you
as
want to
the
be
other
out.
seasons. Yeah.
Yeah, you want to be out in summer. I think that's the thing
But
that I found the
sometimes
hardest.
you're locked into it. Like things happen and then you're like, oh, it's summer.
Just pretend. Yeah, I just love that anything that's like, I won't sing, but you know that the song from Twilight, the
Yes.
That's playing in my head at every time I'm writing. I'm just like, I am in a moody, like I'm in Forks right now. Yeah.
Yeah.
Give me rain.
Yeah, we've had like basically no sun in the UK this year. It's been like a Forks summer. It's just been raining the whole time. But there's been a few, yeah. But there's been like a few days of sunlight, and I had to close the curtains because I was like, I can't focus in this. I closed the curtains and I put the Twilight soundtrack on. I kid you not, that song. Yeah, for me, it's like rain. Rain is the best, but I also love rain when like it hits the windows, but that does not happen in my house. Like, I don't know whether just the way it is or the way the wind hits the house, however it works. Like, there isn't a single window in the house where I hear the rain, so I will sometimes put like rain sounds on just to help that. But also like winter, you know, in winter you feel like this is the time to snuggle down and write a new book, or like you want to read more. But for me, definitely like those darker. I think as well, because I am a bit of a night owl, so like when it gets dark, I'm like, okay, it's time to work now. You know.
I enjoy writing in the summer. I just need to clarify that. I will literally take my laptop and sit by the pool, and
you're one of those.
Like, I feel like I'm on vacation, but
I'm
working. And I have my umbrella and I turn the little bubbler things on. So I get that water is so important. We have to have water noise. But when I'm thinking of where my characters are and what like atmosphere they're in, summer doesn't usually do it for me.
And I think was there a desk? Sorry, yeah, I was just gonna say, I think with the desk setup, for me, I started to have to like make my own, and I kind of saw this from V Schwab, and she has this kind of like little I think they're like a bullet journal, and you just to like to help your productivity and like track how much you're doing. So I started to try and copy that in like a little scribbled version of this. So I have that on my desk. Otherwise, I try and keep it relatively clear. But it depends on the project I'm working on. Sometimes I'll try and put little items for different things. So with Temptation of Magic, I actually had to have this certain bottle of perfume that always reminded me of the very first time like I had the idea for the book. So I would have it there, so I could just like, and I wouldn't spray it on me because it's also kind of rare. Like it went out of I nearly said outprint. Like it went out of, whatever, years ago. So I don't spray it anymore. I'll just have it on the table just in case. But I think the classic thing of a candle. I always need a hot drink though, and probably a snack. My latest one, just for ease of like nibbling, is like dried cranberries and dark chocolate. It's really good because the dark chocolate, then if it doesn't have any sugar in, can be way too bitter, and but then the cranberries, they make it work. So yeah, I find like I need to chew while I type, or I can't, or like have a drink, or I can't concentrate.
I think, isn't there some science to the chewing and brain something? Isn't
I
there?
think so.
I
Yeah,
feel
I
like there's
remember
a
seeing.
science
Yeah.
behind that, but I make things up when I don't know. So maybe not. I think there is though.
So Destiny has a question about how you come up with the names of characters and places you're writing about, and she's brutally honest and says sometimes they seem like letter tossed salad. So how do you come up with the names of your characters and places?
I know for like Sinner's Isle, I was just, well, it's hard because like, especially with Spanish origin names, a lot of them end in O and A. And so like masculine, feminine. And so that's just, I can't help it. It's just how it's going to be because they all sound so pretty. And so for me, I go on vibes. I go on, do they sound hot? And if that's it, then yes, I'm adding them in. And like as I meet friends and I cannot name like male characters after family members, obviously. And so that really narrows it down. There's so many like beautiful, names in my family, but I can't, obviously, we can't do that. So yeah, male names are the hardest because there's so many cousins. But yeah.
Can I tell a quick story about that? I am with you. I have 4 brothers, so their names are off the table. Because what happened long time ago, I wrote a novel with a secondary character who I named Will. And he ended up getting his own book. My dad is a Will, but he is a Wilford. So what I had to do while writing that book is she always thought of him as William. Like she could not think of him as Will. He was William. And so one of my friends was, she's like, why does she always think William? I'm like, listen, we had to do what we had to do. Like he needed a story. He got his story, loved the story, but I could not call him anything that made dad come to mind. So he was William. Never just Will. But yeah, you're so right. The male relatives.
I think at the moment my current books don't have any like really fantasy sounding names. Like it's one that I have written is more so like I knew that I wanted like a certain sound. Like I knew I wanted it to begin with a certain letter. So I like played around from there and so then I made one up. I'm pretty sure I made it up. But I kind of made it up. But otherwise it depends on if, something's descended from mythology, or why you might spell a name a certain way is quite important. Like with my book, Cian is Irish, but the Irish way to spell it is C-I with a fodder, which is a little accent mark, A-N, but he spells it K-Y-A-N, which obviously is like such a classic YA romantasy way of doing it. But there is a reason that it's done that way. And it is another general way to spell the names. But he veered away from the spelling for a reason. So yeah. And then otherwise the word imperial, I didn't make up. It is an ancient Greek word, so its meaning has meaning, but it looks very fantasy, I think, when you see it on the page, because it's Empyreal. So yeah.
I'm generally intimidated by names and place names that I can't pronounce in books. Like it's probably just like because I didn't grow up reading high fantasy, and I'm a little newer to the genre in relation to my age. So because I'm intimidated by them when I read, I'm not going to put them in my books when I write. That said, who knows, maybe what I think is normal and easy to pronounce, someone else doesn't agree.
You know, the hardest thing about that is when you put like the weird fantasy names in your books, and then the audiobook narrator says, "How do you say that?" And I'm like, I don't know, man. You
I've
just
had to
go
go
for it.
back to my recordings where I sent like a recording of how, because somebody asked how to say something, and I'm like, I made a decision at one point in time. I don't remember what that decision was. So I have to go listen to myself speak to remember. It's a thing.
I think most people are always happy to have a pronunciation guide as well, no matter, whether it's because there's a lot of like Irish names are very weird in spelling to other people. So like, people will not be able to pronounce them mentally. So I think it's just like great to kind of normalize having those in for different cultures and different environments as well.
So I know our time is getting short here. Actually, I think we're a tiny bit over, but we do have just a couple more questions that really quickly. One is, are there any book tour plans for the next books being released for each of you that your fans can look out for? And then what are some of your favorite writing tips for the folks who are also interested in writing themselves?
I just got off tour, so I'll skip that one. But my one writing tip that I just want to make sure I say before we wrap things up is persist. Persist to get the book done, persist to find an agent, persist to find a publisher, persist to find your readers. It comes back to that again and again and again in this career. And if you can just remember, persist. And it doesn't necessarily happen on your timeline, but anyone who wants to write a book and feels the passion to tell stories in their heart, I believe they can do it.
I love that and
Yeah.
agree. For me, oh sorry, there's no I'm a baby author, so no tour, no, nothing like that. And I'm also in the UK, so it makes it a little bit harder. But writing advice, I would say, always be honest with what you want to write. Don't think that you have to write something. Don't think that you need to make it less of a certain thing. If you want to write it and you like, even if it's scary, even if you like want to end up having a pen name, whatever works for you, just write it. And I do think the other one is do read a lot. Everyone says it, and I always used to be like, I read, but I didn't. I didn't read a lot. I found it difficult to find books that I love, but I promise if you just keep reading, you will find them. And you do kind of absorb story and the structure and the rules. As the more you read, it does get easier to spot, your plot structures and things that will only make your writing better as you progress.
I'll be not necessarily a book tour, but A Cruel Thirst comes out in December. So I will be doing one book signing local to me, which is Elk Grove, California. If anybody's in the area on December 17th, come say hi. I'll also be at the Romantasy BookCon in LA, and that's in February. And then Love Y'all Book Fest. Are you going?
I'll see you there. Yeah.
Yes. Oh, we're gonna party time. And then I'll be at Love Y'all Book Fest in Atlanta, Georgia in February as well. So that's all I have planned. And then as far as advice, I mean, pretty much on the similar note of just like, it's not necessarily writing advice, but like as a writer or wanting to be an author, is to remember your why. And I think it's so easy to forget sometimes, but like why I started writing is so important to me. And as sometimes, the business gets so hectic and you're looking at numbers and sales and all of these things, and you forget the why of why you started and what made you want to be a writer. And so for me, every time I kind of get lost in that headspace of like, oh, I'm not doing enough, I just remember my why, and I'm doing just fine. So yeah, just remember your why.
dang it, I'm gonna miss you guys. I'm going to the Romantasy Book Con in October, the one that's in Orlando. When you said, I'm like, oh, we're gonna see each other. Nope, we'll not see each other. Just close. I'm doing like a really, really small tour in October. I think I'm headed to Boston. I don't know the date yet. I might be headed to Illinois. Don't know the date yet. And I'll definitely do something local. So in the Seattle-Tacoma area. For writing advice for beginners. And I say the same thing every time. So Destiny, I know you're here and I know you've probably heard me say this 9 times, so I'm sorry. Learn to finish. I know a million amazing writers who can write brilliant openings and then they just dwindle off. And I find it so frustrating because I fall in love with their beginnings and then I'm never going to know how that story finishes. So learn to finish. Coming to the end of a story, coming to the end of a plot line, to the end of an arc, it's not something that we're just born with. Our brains are not born having that skill, but it is something that you can develop over time. So if a novel is too much for you in the beginning, start with a short story because it's shorter, that's in the name, but learning to, rising action, falling action, revolution, your brain will pick up cues on how to do that. And then you'll be able to apply it to anything else that you want to write. But please learn to finish. It's a skill.
I'm a couple of places this fall. I'll be in Salem for the Salem Literary Festival. I think it's on the 7th or the 8th of September. And then I'm in Alberta for a couple of events, Alberta, Canada. And then I might be overseas in October. That's still sort of being hammered out. And then I'll be in Los Angeles for Romantasy-Con in February, though not October. And I think, I don't know, this isn't quite advice. I'll tell just a story quickly. So Heartless Hunter, when I started writing this book, I had just had a baby, and I don't know if anyone has had a baby in the audience, but you are sort of in survival mode, like your brain has shifted. It's like it can't think properly. You are trying to keep a baby alive, trying to keep yourself alive. And so I was in this headspace where I was like, I do not have the time or the energy to work on anything except for what I absolutely want to write. And I did not have the time or the energy to care what anyone thought about what I was writing. I just wanted to write the book that I loved. And I didn't care what anyone thought. If my agent hated it, if my editor hated it, that's fine, but I was going to write it. And I feel so sometimes I call it, I call it my screw it book. I use another word, but and I just feel if you can find that energy, that just screw it energy, I feel channel that, because at least you will love it. But probably if you love it, other people will love it too.
I think that's my new favorite thing. I wrote that down immediately.
Yeah,
Thanks,
I'm at the Cheltenham Lit Fest in October, but that's in the UK. That's not in the US. Sorry. And then I've been told that I'm having a UK tour for Shadow and Tide, which is at the end of February, but there's no details about that yet. But I don't think I'm doing anything in the US. Again, I'm sorry. And I really love everybody's advice. I've been nodding along to everything because I think it's brilliant. And I'd also say I think the art of writing and getting published are two very different things, and you have to absolutely love writing first and foremost, far more than wanting to be published. Although seeing your work as an actual book is definitely a huge goal and incentive, and it's an absolutely wonderful thing. But actually loving the craft and the art of writing and sitting down and putting words on the page and falling in love with the story that you're working on, I think is first and foremost the most important thing with this. Yeah, and my advice, and it's advice to myself as well, because I get caught up in the publishing side and worrying about deadlines and numbers and all of those things, is just to remember how much I love writing, and that's what I always come back to.
I love that. And I think that's such a wonderful place to end. I just want to give a shout out to Lexi, Megan, Kristen, Rachel, Angela, and Kendare. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to Epic Reads for sponsoring this, and to all of the different sponsors and publishers who have made Bookstore Romance Day possible. So thank you again for joining us. And definitely take it from me. I spent 2 weeks reading all of their books. They're all amazing. Please read them.
Thank you all so much. This is Billy from Bookstore Romance Day, and I just want to thank everybody who came to this, our grand finale of Bookstore Romance Day 2024. Thank you to the authors. Thank you to Sandie, and thank you most of all to all of you in the audience, especially those of you who I have seen at multiple panels over the weekend. And just a reminder for everybody who attended, if you registered for this event, you're entered into a drawing to win a bundle of audiobook credits from our friends at Libro FM. Those will be chosen sometime next week, so keep an eye on your email. Thank you all again, and have a great year. We'll see you in 2025.